Okay, ready to dive into another case?
Always.
This one is pretty dark.
Oh, yeah.
It will definitely send shivers down your spine. The kind of case that makes you double-check all the locks.
Makes you want to sleep with the lights on.
Exactly. We're going deep into the world of serial killers.
Always a fascinating, albeit disturbing, topic.
This time, we're looking at Karl F. Werner.
Okay, I've heard that name.
He was active in Santa Clara County, California.
Oh, wow. So right in Silicon Valley.
Yep, back
Yeah.
in the late 60s and early 70s. So, like, right at the heart of the tech boom's early days.
Crazy to think about that juxtaposition, like all this innovation happening and then this darkness lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
Yeah.
We're going to be using Werner's Wikipedia entry as our main source today. We'll break it down piece by piece, see what chilling insights we can unearth, and maybe even try to understand what makes a person capable of such horrific acts.
Sounds like a plan. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with Werner's first known victims.
Right. Got to start somewhere.
DeBargay Furlong, who was just 14 years old,
Yeah.
and Kathy Rain Snoozy, only 15.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. So young.
It really is. Their story starts on what seems like a normal summer day,
Hmm.
August 3rd, 1969. They head out for a picnic,
Just teenagers enjoying their summer break.
and they never return home alive.
It's hard to even fathom what their families must have gone through. The not knowing, the waiting, and then that horrific discovery.
And the way their bodies were found, that adds another layer of disturbing to this whole thing.
How so?
They weren't found where they were murdered. Their bodies were discovered fully clothed
Yeah.
on a
A
hillside
hillside.
overlooking their home.
So they were moved after death. Chilling. What does that tell us?
That the killer was very deliberate, very much in control.
Trying to maybe send a message
Oh.
or taunt the authorities. It's a power play for sure.
Right, and it gets even more unsettling when you look at the crime scene itself. Police reports describe it as incredibly violent. Over 200 stab wounds on Snoozy, over 100 on Furlong, all concentrated above the waist.
That level of violence, it's not just about killing. It's about something more. Rage. Hatred.
We see this in a lot of serial killer cases. This is what criminologists call overkill.
Right. Overkill. It often points to a heightened emotional state in the perpetrator. Like you said, rage, a need for control, maybe even a twisted sense of pleasure.
It's really hard to comprehend.
Yeah, trying to get inside the mind of someone like that. It's a dark place.
Even Dr. John E. Hauser, the Santa Clara County medical examiner at the time, was stunned by the brutality.
What did he say?
He said he had never encountered a case with so many stab wounds in all his years as a coroner.
Wow. So for a seasoned professional like him to be shocked, that really speaks volumes.
It makes you think, what does this type of overkill tell us about Werner?
Right. Was this a crime of passion? Or was it something more calculated, cold and methodical?
We might be able to find some clues as we dig deeper, and there's another detail that makes this even more disturbing.
What's that?
Before these murders, Werner was already a suspect in an unsolved knife assault on another woman.
So there's a pattern of violence here, and it seems to be escalating.
Exactly. It fits this concept of escalating violence that we often see with serial offenders. Like, each act fuels the next. It's like a snowball effect, but with horrifying consequences.
It makes you wonder, did that earlier attack somehow fuel the rage that led to the murders of Furlong and Snoozy?
It's definitely a chilling thought, and sadly, the violence didn't end there. 2 years later, Werner claims his third victim, 18-year-old Kathy Billick.
Oh no, another young woman.
This time, the attack happens in broad daylight
Really? Where?
at Villa Montalvo Park. She was bird watching.
Bird watching, that's just, it's supposed to be peaceful, you know, connecting with nature, and then to have that peace shattered.
It's just horrifying. And again, the details of the attack are incredibly disturbing. Billick was stabbed 17 times in the back and 32 times in the chest and stomach.
Oh my God, the brutality. It's just
Right.
relentless.
But there's a detail in the police reports that I find particularly strange.
What's that?
The attacker avoided stabbing her breasts.
That's interesting. Very specific.
What could that tell us about Werner?
It's hard to say for sure, and we have to be careful not to speculate too much, but it definitely suggests that the violence wasn't completely random.
Right. It's like there was a thought process, a decision-making element, even in the midst of this brutal attack.
Exactly. And patterns like this are crucial in criminal profiling. They can provide valuable insights into the offender's psyche.
So how did they finally catch Werner?
It was a combination of luck and good old-fashioned detective work. You see, a park maintenance worker recognized Werner and remembered seeing him at the park around the time of Bialik's murder.
Oh, interesting. So he thought it was suspicious.
Yeah, he thought Werner was acting strangely and reported him to the police.
Makes you wonder what Werner was doing there.
Right. Was he stalking his next victim? Or revisiting the scene of the crime?
Chilling to think about.
It is. But that tip from the park worker was crucial. The police already suspected a link between the Furlong-Snoozy murders and Bialik's death. They even referred to Bialik's murder as a carbon copy killing.
So they were already on his trail.
In a way, yes. And the fact that Werner was spotted near the latest crime scene just solidified their suspicions.
I bet the discovery of the murder weapon in Werner's home sealed the deal.
Oh, absolutely. That's the kind of physical evidence that can make or break a case, directly linking him to the crime scene. No room for doubt there.
But there's another twist to this story that might surprise you.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
The famous San Francisco inspector Dave Toschi.
Toshki, as in the guy who was heavily involved in the Zodiac killer investigation.
That's the one. He initially thought that the Zodiac might be responsible for the Furlong-Snoozy murders.
Whoa, so you're saying there might be a connection between Werner and the Zodiac killer?
Well, not exactly. But because of the similarities in the crimes, Toschi considered it. And get this, Werner was actually a suspect in the Zodiac killings at the time of his arrest.
Wow, I had no idea. So did they ever prove a connection?
No, it turned out to be a dead end. Werner was ruled out as a Zodiac suspect because he was actually living in Massachusetts during some of the Zodiac's confirmed crimes.
Oh, so a solid alibi.
Yep. But it just goes to show how complex these investigations can be, especially when you're dealing with high-profile cases, and how easy it is to get caught up in those potential connections.
Right. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one.
And in this case, all the evidence pointed to Werner. He was the sole perpetrator of these awful crimes.
It's a tough reality to face, but crucial for getting justice for the victims.
It is. But even with Werner behind bars, the question remains, what led him down this path? What made him capable of such brutality?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The why behind these horrific acts. And it's something we'll continue to explore as we dig deeper into Werner's life and background.
Stay tuned as we attempt to unravel the complexities of this disturbing case. Welcome back. We're continuing our deep dive into the unsettling world of Karl F. Werner. Last time we covered a lot of ground. It's heavy stuff.
It is, but I think it's important that we acknowledge the impact this had, the real impact on the victims and their families.
Absolutely. And while we can never truly understand what they went through, we can try to learn from examining these details.
Right. Like, by analyzing the specific details of these attacks, we might gain some insight into Werner's psyche, the way he chose to inflict violence. It's telling.
You mentioned overkill before the break, and how it suggests a heightened emotional state. But is there anything more specific we can take away from the sheer number of stabbings, the type of wounds? Does the Wikipedia entry shed any light on that?
It does. Actually, there's this quote from Dr. Hauser, the medical examiner. He described the wounds on Furlong and Snoozy as a frenzied flurry of knife wounds.
A frenzied flurry? What?
Yeah. I mean, that phrasing, it suggests a complete loss of control. Like, the attack was purely impulsive, driven by raw emotion.
That's a chilling thought. And the fact that there was no sign of a struggle from the victims, it makes it even more disturbing, like they never even had a chance.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a sudden, brutal attack. The victims were completely caught off guard.
So this suddenness, this lack of defense from the victims, what does that tell us about Werner?
Well, it could suggest that he had a level of confidence, even a sense of control over the situation.
This need for control seems to be a recurring theme with him.
Right.
We see it in the overkill, the lack of struggle, and even with Kathy Billick, his third victim. Remember, he specifically avoided stabbing her breasts, like he was making a conscious choice.
Right. That detail is fascinating, isn't it? It indicates that the violence wasn't completely random. There was a thought process there, a decision-making element to the attack.
It's mind-boggling, this mix of rage and control, like he was trying to exert dominance, but in the most horrific way imaginable.
You know, that's a really insightful observation. It actually ties into a much broader conversation about the psychology of serial killers.
Yeah, it's a topic that people find both terrifying and fascinating.
Exactly. People are always trying to figure out the why. Like, what drives someone to commit such horrific acts?
It's like trying to understand the darkest parts of the human psyche.
Right. It's a glimpse into the abyss. And while we may never fully comprehend what makes someone like Werner tick, examining those patterns in the violence, the deliberate choices he made, it can offer us some clues.
It's definitely sobering. But understanding those patterns, it's crucial. Who knows, maybe it can help us identify those warning signs in others and prevent future tragedies.
You're absolutely right. The more we learn, the better equipped we are to recognize and potentially intervene.
So let's shift gears a bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happened after Werner was arrested. The Wikipedia entry mentions that he confessed to all 3 murders, and he received a life sentence.
Yes, he was held accountable for his crimes, which I'm sure brought some sense of justice, however delayed, to the victims' families.
It does. And his confession, it actually reveals something interesting about serial killer behavior.
Oh, what's that?
This need for recognition, like a twisted sense of pride in their actions.
Yes. You're right. Some serial killers, they crave that notoriety, the attention that comes with their crimes. It's like a validation of their power.
So you're saying that Werner's confession could be seen as a way for him to, claim ownership of his actions.
In a way, yes. And, to ensure his place in the annals of true crime history.
It's a really disturbing thought, but it makes a strange kind of sense.
It does, unfortunately. It's like they want to leave their mark on the world, even if that mark is one of death and terror. It's a complex and, frankly, a very twisted psychology.
So, moving on, what about Werner's life before all of this? Was there anything in his background, anything that hinted at this capacity for violence?
That's the question, right? What are those red flags? The early warning signs? And it's not an easy question to answer, unfortunately.
No, I imagine not.
Often, serial killers, they're able to blend in,
Yeah.
seem perfectly normal.
That's what's so scary. You could be interacting with someone every day
Yeah.
and have no idea about the darkness inside them.
It's true. But the Wikipedia entry does offer a few interesting insights into Werner's personality. For example, it mentions that he was a classmate of Deborah Furlong and Kathy Snoozy, his first 2 victims.
Wow. So he actually knew them? That adds a whole new layer of creepiness to this whole thing.
It does. It really does.
I mean, think about it. Someone you went to school with, someone who seemed ordinary, could actually be capable of such horrific acts.
It's a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places. The entry also includes a quote from a girl who dated Werner.
Oh, wow. What did she say?
She described him as, and I quote, accomplished in mathematics, and not, quote, the weird skulking guy that we picture as a serial killer.
It's incredible how deceptive appearances can be.
It is, and it's a reminder that there's no easy formula for identifying a potential killer. It's not that simple.
So, if there's no easy way to spot a potential killer, what can we do? How do we protect ourselves?
That's a question we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll discuss the world of criminal profiling, the techniques used to catch these individuals, and how we can all become more aware of the dangers that might be lurking right under our noses. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back. Still trying to wrap our heads around Karl Werner. We've talked a lot about his crimes, the psychology behind them. But I'm wondering, is there anything in this Wikipedia entry that tells us about his life before all this? Like, who was Karl Werner before he became a killer?
It's a fascinating question, right?
Yeah.
Trying to understand those formative experiences, the relationships, the turning points, what shapes a person, and in this case, what set him on this path of violence. Unfortunately, the entry doesn't really give us a whole lot to go on about Werner's early life.
It's always the question, isn't it? Like nature versus nurture. What made him this way?
It really is. We know he was born in 1952 in Marlborough, Massachusetts,
Okay.
and later moved to San Jose, California, where he went to Oak Grove High School.
And that's where he would have crossed paths with his first victims, right?
Exactly. Deborah Furlong and Kathy Snoozy, they were his classmates.
It's just chilling, to think someone you went to school with, someone who seemed like a normal teenager, could be capable of such horrific things.
It really underscores the idea that evil can hide in plain sight, behind a mask of normalcy.
We've been talking about this idea of profiling throughout this deep dive, trying to pinpoint those warning signs. But I imagine it's not an exact science, is it?
It's not. It's incredibly complex. Because, as we've seen, sometimes those who commit these kinds of acts, they blend in seamlessly. They can be charming, charismatic, appear perfectly normal to everyone around them.
That's what makes it so terrifying, right? Because you just never truly know what's going on inside someone's head. But I'm curious, is there anything in this Wikipedia entry that gives us more insight into Werner's personality?
Well, there are a few details that stand out. For example, it mentions that a girl who dated Werner described him as accomplished in mathematics and not, quote, The weird skulking guy that we picture as a serial killer.
Wow, that's pretty striking.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
he was able to compartmentalize these different parts of himself. Or maybe he was just really good at hiding his true nature.
It's a good question, and it's something that investigators grapple with all the time, trying to figure out those warning signs, those red flags. But the truth is, there's no magic formula.
No, it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. It's a complex mix of factors, and often those signs are very subtle, easy to miss.
Okay, so given that, I mean, what can we do? How do we protect ourselves?
It's a question we all ask, right, after hearing these kinds of stories.
It is. It's like you hear these things and you want to be able to prevent them from happening again. But how do we do that?
Well, I think the first step is awareness,
Right.
acknowledging that evil can wear many masks.
Being vigilant without being paranoid, I guess.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. We need to be aware of the potential dangers, but we can't let fear control our lives.
It's hard, though, isn't it, to find that balance? Especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with these kinds of stories.
It is hard, and I think that's why these deep dives are so important, because they force us to confront those uncomfortable truths, to grapple with the darkness that exists in the world, and hopefully to learn from it.
That's a good point. And in a way, that's what we've been doing with this deep dive, right? Trying to make sense of the senseless.
Exactly, trying to understand what makes a person capable of such horrific acts. And in doing so, maybe we can prevent future tragedies, or at least be more aware of the warning signs.
So where does that leave us with Karl Werner? We've explored the details of his crimes, we've talked about the psychological factors, but I still feel like there's this big question mark hanging over him.
Yeah, after all this, after dissecting every detail, I think the most unsettling part is that we still don't really know him.
It's like he remains this enigma, this shadowy figure.
He does, and that's perhaps the scariest part of all, because it reinforces the idea that evil can lurk anywhere, and it might not always look like what we expect.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember what you said earlier. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about these dark corners of human nature, the better equipped we are to navigate the world safely and help others do the same. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been, well, intense, to say the least, but I think it's been a valuable one.
I agree. And, even though we may never fully understand the why behind these cases, the fact that we're even asking the question, that we're trying to learn, that's a step in the right direction.